Welcome to another episode of the KUBIK Report podcast. Today I am pleased to share my 22nd podcast with Greg Thomas, and I'm happy to have him join us again here on the KUBIK Report. Hello, Greg.
Hello, Vic.
Greg is a business leader, author, keynote speaker, and a personal life coach that I have known for nearly 2 decades. His clients range from large Fortune 100 corporations down to small family-owned businesses, and many individual clients seeking personal leadership development. His website is LeadershipExcellenceNow.com. As a reminder, you can learn more about Greg's training skills on his YouTube channel. Simply type in Leadership Excellence Channel on the YouTube homepage search bar, and you will find him. So, Greg, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Vic. It's great to be here. As I mentioned to you before you turned the button on, I did have an opportunity to visit Poplar Forest, which was Thomas Jefferson's resort home near Lynchburg, Virginia, earlier in the week. And I suggest if anyone wants a 1 or 2 day trip who are in the Midwest or New England, I encourage you to check it out. It is just an incredibly well-designed home by Thomas Jefferson, a lot of rich history there. I had a great time, very inspiring. I'm ready to move forward.
Well, that was very interesting what you said about it because I had never heard of it. I've been to Monticello and saw the remarkable home there.
Sure.
With all of his personal inventions and his research and the work that he did. He was just an amazing person. But I hadn't realized that he had a home west of there. I thought pretty much that area was pretty much the wild, wild west at that time. It was settled, and he had built a home. So I'm going to put that on my bucket list for when we go there. Because we had, like I said, toured Monticello one time on our way back from Hampton Roads, and we just really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you'll truly enjoy it. First of all, it's the first home in the United States to have a skylight, which he got from the French when he was an ambassador for France. It's the second home in the United States to be designed as an octagon, and all of the internal rooms are octagon-shaped except for the center of the home, which was his dining room, and it's a perfect cube, 20 feet wide, 20 feet long, 20 feet high. So it just, again, it's so Jeffersonian. It's those remarkable creative gifts that he had for architecture that jump out at you when you visit it. So just to give you some food for thought. Now we can get back to the podcast.
Well, in the past, we have spoken with Greg on numerous interesting topics, including many podcasts on personal development and leadership skills. And you can find all of these past 21 episodes on the KUBIK Report, and in the show notes, I have a link that links you right to all of them all at once, and so you can see them one after another. But today we begin a brand new topic, overcoming defeat. What is the right approach regarding our personal disappointments and mistakes? We live in a world of increased anxiety and emotional stress. Since the pandemic, many studies have shown a dramatic rise in loneliness and discouragement. Many people have given up on life because of their negative life experiences, including addictions, relationship issues, or guilt from past serious mistakes. Today is September 11th, the 24th anniversary of 9/11, and yesterday, assassination of Charlie Kirk, a very well-known conservative activist. 31 years old. I just hadn't realized how young a person he was. I attended the National Religious Broadcasters Conference in Dallas. This was about 4 years ago. And I sat on a podcast with him. He had just a circle of people around him, just very, very close. Could almost touch him. And he did a podcast right there in front of us. Just very personable, very likable person. And, of course, the tragedy yesterday of having a life of age 31 snuffed out with a wife and 2 children. Let's talk about overcoming defeat.
Mm-hmm.
When we make a serious mistake or feel like a failure, what is the right approach to these feelings?
Well, the right approach is to realize that making mistakes and feeling defeated are natural human responses to the foolish things that we do. And the goal is to take the approach in a balanced way. Feeling a balanced sense of shame or disappointment is actually healthy because it shows we care about our conduct and we're capable of regret. And if we're capable of regret, we're capable of change. Where most people go wrong after they've done something that is shameful, or they feel defeated, or they're discouraged over something they said or something they did, where most people go wrong, or they fall into one of two ditches. One ditch is being very callous. They don't process it. They fluff it off. They don't think about what they did. They're not apologetic for what they said. And that's one ditch where you're just so calloused and uncaring about your conduct or your thoughts that you don't care at all. The other ditch, and a lot of people fall into this ditch as well, is being deeply guilt-ridden, to the point that the guilt changes your life in a negative way. Instead of allowing the process to change your life in a positive way, the guilt hangs over you. It holds you back. It shuts you down. It literally vacates your desire to do new things and to step out and try something different. So we have to realize that there is a balance there, and feeling a sense of regret or failure is the first step towards self-reflection and change, and it all begins with acknowledgement. For those of us who are religious, we understand, of course, the theological concept of repentance. And repentance means that we acknowledge and we accept that we've done something that is wrong. And that's the first step. It's like you can't help an alcoholic if they don't admit they're an alcoholic. And you can't change, you can't become something better if you don't acknowledge who and what you are. And if you commit something that is giving you a deep sense of regret and personal shame, acknowledging that and living up to it and facing it is the very first important action. Again, we don't want to fall into that unbalance of going into a ditch of being calloused and not caring, because we'll continue to make the same foolish mistakes and errors over and over again and never learn from them. At the other end, we don't want to fall into the ditch of always feeling deeply guilty and pulling us into despondency, making us feel like we're a complete failure or a loser, because that holds us back, and that's not healthy, and that's not what we want to happen either. So that's why we have to have the right approach to these feelings.
So what types of things can we do to overcome the feeling of defeat?
Well, we'll start off with just some addition to what we were just mentioning, and that is to acknowledge and accept our emotions and recognize what is being felt. If you feel sadness or frustration, anger or hopelessness, don't deny it. Don't just slough it off. That's an important step in the healing process. And apologize to anyone who is hurt or offended by your actions. And if you can make something right, if you did something wrong that's correctable, then take that action and correct what you can. It's important to realize that allowing these feelings and accepting that they're normal after setbacks is a crucial first step. And again, that theological term repentance is an acknowledging and accepting of the fact that we are human beings. We have carnality, and we are prone to be imperfect. We are prone to make mistakes. So it's important for us to move after this acknowledgement into a period of reflection and what I call processing the feeling of defeat. So we want to go through a natural process, beginning with acknowledgement, beginning with asking for forgiveness, whether it's a spiritual forgiveness or going to your spouse or going to people whom you have wounded or hurt. That's an important part of that process. And then continuing the process into reflecting and meditating on why you did what you did. Thinking about how I can improve, thinking about how I can change, and thinking about the differences I can make. Allow that feeling of defeat to become something positive. Allow it to transform you and take you to another level of personal growth. And you can do that through reflection, through meditation, which is another biblical tool that people can use in order to totally acknowledge, accept those emotions, and begin the process of healing, begin the process of personal growth and change. And then you move on to begin to practice self-compassion. Treat yourself as you would a good friend who made a bad mistake. If you had a very good friend, someone you loved who made a bad mistake, you would not condemn them. You would hear them out. You would say, acknowledge, yep, that wasn't very smart, that wasn't very good, that wasn't very wise, but you would treat them with kindness and understanding instead of just harshly condemning them for what they did. And we need to treat ourselves that way. Again, that's part of the process of growing, process of learning through that negative experience. And studies show that self-compassion counters stress and anxiety. It promotes emotional resilience. It helps identify good solutions and the changes that are needed. If we continue down that spiral path towards deep guilt and regret and shame, we're not going to get to the place where we can acknowledge good solutions and changes that we need to make because we're too much in our heads and too focused on that level of negativity. Another thing we can do, Vic, is to reframe that negative thinking. So when you notice, I'll give you an example. You notice an inner dialogue, and you maybe say to yourself, I failed, or I'm a loser. Well, instead of saying that to yourself, and that may be your natural initial reaction when it first hits, when the defeat is first felt, you need to reframe that negative feelings, those thinking, to something like, I have much more to learn and I can improve. I need to change some negative things in my life. So you reframe that negative thinking so that it doesn't put you into a tailspin, so that it doesn't put you down and become a chronic form of shame or guilt, and it allows you to heal and move forward as you acknowledge your weakness, as you acknowledge what you did, and you realize maturely that you have a lot more to learn in life and that you can dramatically improve if you focus on those changes. But it's important to stay away from that high degree of negativity, because that's going to happen. As I've said before, we had a podcast on self-talk. About 80% of our self-talk eventually turns negative, because that's just the way our minds are, like a pinball. And we have this ongoing dialogue going on in our heads all day. And studies have shown that eventually, as we're talking to ourselves, we're thinking these things, and then it usually always turns against us and turns into negativity. That's, again, our human nature, unfortunately, coming into focus. And it's kind of a survival technique to caution us, to make us fearful, to make us guilty, but we have to resist that because it's coming from inside of our heads, and it can be debilitating. It can be very negative. So as you go through this process, then you can begin to take small positive steps daily. You can do things like make a list of the challenges and some of the things you can do to change. Don't expect dramatic change overnight. It took you umpteen years to get where you are today in your life, and you were just not going to throw a switch and be totally different tomorrow. And if you expect that, you're setting yourself up for more shame. You're setting yourself up for more failure because you're over expecting the change that you can make suddenly or dramatically. I mean, religious people know that once they're baptized, that's just the beginning of a long process. They're going to continue to stumble and make mistakes over and over again because it is a process. So it's important that we think about that and practice positive self-affirmations. We've also talked about that, by the way, in another podcast we've had. And it can be Bible verses for some people. For other people, it's inspirational statements made by others. I think I've used in the past an example here of the Apostle Paul saying that I can do all things through Christ. Now, he had the right perspective of that. He wasn't giving himself credit, but he knew he had something within him that gave him the ability to change and adapt and do new and remarkable and bold things because of what resided in him. That's an example of a positive self-affirmation and using a scripture to reinforce those principles. Mm-hmm. Another small step, a positive step we can do daily, is to help someone else. Acts of kindness to others can rebuild a sense of self-worth, and it can help us refocus our perspective. Again, it gets us out of ourselves, out of our heads, and into doing something good and positive for someone else. So those small positive steps are really important.
No, Greg, I read an article in Atlantic Monthly magazine. This was about early 2022, maybe even January 2022. And the article was about regret. I thought, why is Atlantic writing about this? But it talked about how among business people that there's a sense of regret that really holds them back from moving forward, even in their business. And it was one of the most excellent articles I have read on the subject because it talked about proactive steps to take. And it showed how important it is to acknowledge the cause of that regret, but not to wallow in it, not to have it overcome you, but to take constructive steps of what to do. And interestingly enough, I use that for a sermon. I use that for a presentation to the group that I was speaking to. And then the next week, somebody else did not know that I had spoken on that subject, also saw the article and gave one because it was so outstanding.
Oh, wow, yeah.
In the Atlantic Monthly. Too, is that you were saying about acts of kindness and goodness. In our role, yours and mine, we've had unpleasant experiences even with people, management of people, where we've had to tell people unpleasant things. And sometimes it didn't go very well because it just didn't go very well. And there's hurts that continue and persist, sometimes even for long periods of time. And I know that I have tried to look back on people where maybe things hadn't gone so well, and I thought, boy, I wish I could really just talk to them again. But you know what I find is that these people are no longer around. They're dead. As I look at obituary pages here, there are people that are younger than me. And I'm thinking that wouldn't it be nice to just be able to give them a phone call, not to talk about the subject, but to show and affirm that they are valuable, that you respect them, that you honor them. Maybe something did happen long, long time ago that was an unpleasant experience, but to build that type of relationship back, because we have had so many things that have happened between people who know the principles, who can talk the talk, but really have a hard time to really live through and practice those principles and walk them through to their positive conclusion. So I just wanted to add.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. And you're right. And that leads us to the final comment I want to make here regarding your question, and that is to seek support and seek people where you can make a connection. Talk to someone you trust, a professional, talk to a minister, talk to a good friend. When you vent and you express your feelings, you experience a release of an emotional burden. So it's important to do that. I've even shared some things with my primary care physician that weren't necessarily medical oriented, but I would be asked a question, and from my doctor, I get my annual wellness checkup by Medicare that Medicare pays for, and the doctors have been very helpful in giving me some advice to things that I might be struggling with that aren't specifically related to a medical condition. So talk to a professional, vent with them, and then lean on a reliable support system for encouragement. It might be, again, your family. It might be a friend. It might be attending religious services. It might be a personal prayer. And rely on this support system for encouragement, for practical advice, for new perspectives, maybe a new way of looking at how you're feeling or the situation that you find yourself in. So seeking support and making that connection with loved ones or people who love you is very important. And again, that's part of the healing process. That's part of the ways that we can overcome the feeling of defeat.
Well, one thing, too, you mentioned loneliness in connection with that. There's some people who have isolated themselves so far, so deeply into their world that they're struggling even to find people that they can talk to, sympathetic to them. So this indeed is a real thing. So, Greg, what you are saying is that we can manage these emotions, right?
Absolutely, we sure can. The only person in charge of you is yourself. And if you make a bad decision, step one is don't blame others, because all you're doing is you're hindering that process. You're beginning to fall into that ditch of callousness if the first thing you think of is how to blame someone else for something that you did that's causing these feelings. And to take some time to analyze why you did what you did, acknowledge the errors, we've talked about that, and identify what went wrong, and to use that information to help you make better decisions each day. So yes, we're the one that has to take self-leadership. We're the ones that have to take charge in managing our emotions, in managing our feelings. One of the first things we do is managing that mindset, again, that self-talk. I think I've mentioned in a previous podcast Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a neuropsychologist and a founder of a major clinic. Very smart man. He's on PBS all the time. And what he said is, and again, this is to overcome the negativity of self-talk. He says, give your mind a name and then talk back to it when it's giving you discouraging messages that interfere with your ability to move forward. I've done that for years. The name that I gave my mind is Greg. And oftentimes I'll say to myself, Greg, calm down, or Greg, I'm not buying into that, or that's not a fair feeling to have towards that person. You don't even know them well enough. So don't be afraid to challenge your self-talk and talk back to yourself when you notice something that's negative or trying to demoralize you or pull you down. Just don't accept it because it's coming from your mind. We lie to ourselves constantly. So you have every right to give your mind a name and then talk back to it when it's giving you advice or feelings that simply are not true and are not fair. And another thing you can do to manage it is to look for small amounts of happiness. We go through life sometimes and there are micro moments of happiness that happen all day long and we don't even pay attention to them. You can boost your mood by beginning to focus on the little things that bring you joy each day. But we're often so busy, we're so preoccupied in one way or another that we lose sight of the details that each day can provide to make us smile. Step outside. You see that flower? Walk over to that flower. Take a look at it. Smell it. Savor that moment. You're drinking that beverage? Just stop. Get present in the moment and enjoy that beverage when you drink it. When someone smiles at you, focus on that smile. Say to them, thank you so much. That smile really means a lot to me. But these moments add up when we notice them. And it lifts our spirits and it makes us appreciate each day. It makes each day a little bit richer. So look for those small amounts of happiness. And as you're going through this process, you may have spent a fair amount of time beating yourself up. And again, we do that, especially early on as we go through that self-reflection. We beat ourselves up for what happened, but at some point, it's important to accept that you can't change the past. And hanging on to the loss and disappointment of anything for too long will prevent you from growing. It will prevent you from trying new things in the future. So we have to be careful of that. If we don't stop beating ourselves up, it can restrict your ability to use your talents or dreams to create a greater sense of meaningfulness in your life. So we have to get beyond that initial sense of shame and guilt. You may remember the story in the Bible of David when his first child, Bathsheba, died. And he spent days fasting and prayer and asking God to save the child's life. And he stunned his advisors when he heard that the child was dead. He got up, he washed his face off, and what did he do? He got on with life. Because he said, I can't change the past. The child is gone, sitting here living in grief and shame for the rest of my life is not productive. It's not going to help anyone. And he got on with the rest of his life. So instead of being anchored to your loss, work on forgiving yourself of what happened. I found out years ago when I was a pastor that many people were struggling with not forgiving themselves. They would repent, and God forgave them. And long after God has forgiven them, Years later, they're still struggling and anchored to that sense of guilt and loss because they never forgave themselves for what happened. They still want to remain frozen in that past episode, even though it can't be changed, it can't be improved. You just have to live with it and move on and start, build a new foundation and go forward from there. And once you're willing to do that, you can release your feelings of defeat. You can dust yourself off and you get up and start all over again, just like David did.
Well, one thing you mentioned here is forgiving yourself, but also as we forgive others. My question is how deeply do we forgive others? I have seen things that have been forgotten, and then they come roaring back as people bring things up again. And it reminds me so much of probably the most valuable instructions from the Bible about loving your enemies and forgiving and to be forgiving of those who spitefully hurt you and use you. To really do that, and not just with glittering generalities or with platitudes, but to really let go. This is a big thing of just letting go of things that could cause you to sit there and brood for hours at a time. And in the religious community, often this is worse almost than in the other community because there's so much invested spiritually. And when there is distress or when there's estrangement, it's really, really hard. As one person put to me, there's no hurt like church hurt, and there's no mean like church mean. People who are so invested with each other, they love each other so much at first, and then when something goes wrong, it really is painful.
Okay, I'm ready for the next question, Vic.
So, what are some effective mental techniques to overcome the feelings of defeat, Greg?
Well, the first one is called cognitive reframing. It sounds like a big word, but what it really means is you change the way you interpret setbacks, and you choose to see them as learning opportunities or stepping stones in your life rather than just labeling yourself a failure or looking at that event or what you said as a complete failure. This strategy helps you to challenge negative or distorted automatic thoughts and recognize that you have the potential for self-improvement. You don't have to remain the way you are. The feelings that you have right now will not last forever. They are meant to last for a short while if you're in a moment of regret or shame or embarrassment, but through that process, which is part of a healing process, you literally can change and you can cognitively reframe that event and look at it as a part of a life experience, a stepping stone to get you from here to wherever it is you're supposed to be. So that's the first thing, first mental technique that you can use. Another one, and this ties into it, it's adopt a growth mindset. And when you embrace a growth mindset, by the way, we've also talked about this in a previous podcast. Vic, it just amazes me how many these things all tie together with previous podcasts that we have had. But when you have a growth mindset, you view setbacks as opportunities for learning and personal growth rather than making it a fixed failure. And again, that's that one ditch that I talked about earlier where people continue to wallow in shame and guilt because they have a fixed failure mindset because of what happened. Anything can be forgiven. Anything can be amended and can be changed. Anyone who is of sound mind can be capable of change and growth and maturity, and you have to give yourself room to grow and change, and you do that by developing that growth mindset and remind yourself that progress isn't like throwing a switch and you were doing one thing and tomorrow you're doing the exact opposite, even though that may be true occasionally. For most of us, our lives are a work in progress, and that means we go through trials, we make errors, we adapt, we change, and we realize that these setbacks are part of a long-term achievement. It's slow, it's tedious. Sometimes we make 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but yet we still realize that it is a stepping stone progress to get from where we are today to where we should be. And that's what happens when you adopt a growth mindset.
Well, that's what, as you talk about this, it just relives the fact that I've been in management and church pastorship and executive leadership and board direction. It sounds so much like that. It really does. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Whatever.
Sure. Yep.
A lot of things that have to do with people and their different feelings and considering people's feelings and how you treat them, and how you treat them will determine how you will work together for long. But those were excellent points that really we should all abide by.
Another thing I'd like to talk about here is we discuss mental techniques, and this is really important because this begins to shift everything. After we've made that acknowledgement, after we're in the process, after we've begun forgiving ourselves, after we've been forgiven by God or others, we can begin to shift our focus on gratitude. Gratitude encourages the brain to notice and appreciate even small little aspects in life. We begin to be thankful even for the little things, and that helps to counter the patterns of negative thinking that commonly arise when we're going through adversity. Something like a simple meal. There are many people on earth whose entire goal all day long today will be to find enough food just to feed their family today. And then they get to do that all over again tomorrow. And here we take for granted a simple meal, a compliment from a spouse, a nation that has so many ways to protect us against job loss, sudden health crisis, and all of these things that are built into our system that give us a sense of security that we should be grateful for. And when we're grateful for things, this practice interrupts the cycle of worry about the past or worry about the future, and it anchors us into the present when we show gratitude. And we begin to seize and realize those positive moments that we can find in each and every day, from the simple things that we have, the blessings, the good things we've been given that, frankly, most people on earth would love to have. I forget the exact number, but as I told a group of people a few weeks ago, I think there's around 20 million people in the United States who were not born here. There's a reason they want to come here. And the reason is the incredible blessings and opportunities we have in this nation. We shouldn't take that for granted. We shouldn't think we're entitled to those things. We should have a deep sense of gratitude for the gift of being born in a nation that was so blessed. Not that we did anything to do about it. We may have just been born into a healthy culture, and one that provides opportunities and jobs and the ability to own a home and all those things that we think we're entitled to are things that we are blessed with, and we should appreciate them profoundly. Regularly expressing gratitude builds a type of psychological immune system, so that when something happens later, it's easier to cope with stress and fear and loss and hardship, because that gratitude is like a booster to help us to get through times of difficulty, times of feeling remorse for what we did.
I know that I have resisted having people even come to the U.S. from these developing nations. They are so poor. They are so poor. In one of our meetings, one time I sat there and said, here's the front row of the meeting that we're having. Here's one person here who makes $100,000 a year. In the same row, there's somebody there who makes $15,000 a year.
Right, sure.
Then there's somebody next to him who makes $50 a week. Just makes under $2,000 or $3,000 a year. What a disparity between a $3,000 person and the person who is $100,000 or more. It's just so hard to see that inequity, but that's the way it is. But we cannot focus on that, as you said. And one more thing I'd like to say,
sure,
not an extra point, but as far as regret, so easy to blame somebody that look what they did, or they bypassed me, or they did this. I think it's important, as far as the healing of the mind, to get away from that blame game, to where you are blame storming continually about Well, this is why. This is what they did. And somebody who brings up things from the past, 10, 20, sometimes even 30, 40 years in the past, that is not a healthy mindset. You have to live in the present from where you are to where you will go. And having learned the points that you brought out in the podcast today, build a healthy mindset.
Yeah, Vic, I mean, study after study, and there's been a lot of studies on gratitude, show that grateful people demonstrate resilience, optimism, and the ability to recover after a personal setback compared to those who are entitled or live in a victimization mindset. Gratitude goes a long way. It improves our mental and physical health. Again, these studies show that gratitude shows lower levels of anxiety, depression. It shows improved mood. It shows a greater overall life satisfaction. Biologically, just the feeling, a showing of gratitude increases positive neurotransmitters in our minds, dopamine, serotonin, and these are natural. From our minds into our body, it directly impacts feelings of happiness and contentment. And we're wired as human beings to naturally, unconsciously have those chemicals released in our bodies when we demonstrate an act or a thought of gratitude towards something. So practicing gratitude often deepens social bonds and feelings of connection with others, and that can help us to combat isolation and loneliness that are common in the tough times that we live in.
Well,
so you bet, Vic. I hope you'll have me back next time, and we'll take this to another level and maybe look at people who embrace Christianity and what they can do when they experience defeat or the feelings of defeat, because the belief in Christianity takes everything that I've said to a whole new transformational level. So maybe we can talk about that next time.
I would love to do that. And Greg, there's a movement towards, in the Z generation now, they're noticing, towards seeking answers from beyond just secular sources.
Yes, absolutely.
Of course, they're the young ones, but the level of atheism in, for example, the X and the Y generations is about 25%. And they're finding in studies in the Z generation, it's more like 11%. And people are being tired of hearing about things regarding woke and fake and all this type of thing. And finding there's discouragement and despondency in that particular mindset or that philosophy. And they're seeking answers along the lines that we'll be talking about. So I really appreciate this very, very much.
Great. Vic, I'm so old. I remember when fake news was the National Enquirer.
Actually, one of my bosses loved it. Okay, well, this has just been a great podcast. It's been nearly a month or more since we've had one, but I appreciate that. I'm also wanted to mention, too, that you can get Greg's book, Making Life's Puzzle Pieces Fit. It's still available at Amazon. I'll include a link to it there. But Chapter 6 is dealing with disappointment.